Alright, so today live review of the Botanist Isla Dry Gin. This is from Isla, so that's that magical Scotch whiskey island that makes all the smoky scotches. Um, and this is a Remy Cointreau, Remy Martin product. 46% ABV, 92 proof. And this is made at the Bruichladdich distillery in Isla. Um, and it's made in a still called Ugly Betty. I think I've heard of that one before. Yeah, we talk about Isla a lot, but usually not in reference to gins. But at the Bruichladdich distillery in Isla, there is a still that they rescued from the Inner Leven distillery, which closed down and decommissioned. And so they had this still that is now called Ugly Betty, and this is made at the Ugly Betty on the Ugly Betty still at Bruichladdich. And this has 22 foraged island botanicals. So this particular gin has 22 botanicals that are foraged from the island of Isla. So there's nothing else in here but botanicals that came from Isla. So it is unique in that regard. It is probably the only gin the only gin that is made with Isla botanicals, so it is an Isla gin. Dr. Suck, thanks for the various gifts. I appreciate you. And these botanicals are infused both before and after distillation. And I'm not a gin expert, but I guess that's maybe not normal. That they are infused twice before and after it's distilled. So that is maybe something of note. So we'll give it a score out of 100. 25 for the aroma, 25 for the palate, 25 for the finish, 10 for the texture, and 15 for my personal experience, which may be low because it tastes roughly like bug spray sometimes. But let's see. There's been some, air in here for a little bit. Maybe that matters in gin. I don't know. Rescued? Poor still was being abused. I mean, maybe. I don't know how they used it at the distillery that closed down, but I mean, I assume if it's called Ugly Betty, somebody did something to it. It's a synthetic Corco. There it is. And of course, since we're talking about gin, we don't have to talk about color because there's no aging involved here. So there's a very clear color, which would make sense. It is not one of those colored gins, I suppose. And it is not a barrel-aged gin, which does exist. So again, I'm just going to give this about a minute. But my previous experience with this gin is, of course, you have typical like juniper kind of characteristics, but there is like some pine, some bug spray, deep woods off bug spray kind of note. There's also like a rough like Sprite element, like lemon lime. That's kind of roughly what I remember about the last time I drank this gin neat, which has not been my favorite gin so far. This was the first gin I ever had, so I kind of thought that most of them probably taste kind of like this, but this actually tastes nothing like the other gin that I bought, which has like bark and cinnamon and ginger and other spices kind of infused into it, and it has a very bready, very baking spice kind of forward flavor, unlike this one. So that's what makes me excited about gin is you can infuse it with all kinds of different things, which makes it interesting. And I kind of thought maybe it's just the aroma, but it's there on the palate too. So of course we will explore some more gins. And the nice part about gin is it's not expensive. This is probably half the price of a barely acceptable 12-year-old Scotch. So it's a pretty good value too. But of course, the flavors may not be most suitable for a neat pour, but That's how we're going to hit it today. Oh, yep. Yep, there's some of that juniper, but also like Sprite. It's more Sprite than 7 Up for me, if that makes much of a difference to you. There's a vague Deep Woods Off bug spray note. We'll say kind of more minor. But heavy on the like citrus, very like Sprite, lemon lime aromas. I'm trying to dig into something else there, but what time is it for me? It is just after lunchtime. How are you today, Jez? How are you? There's a slight herbal quality, like way at the bottom here. I'm actually kind of getting a little bit of a floral note too, which wasn't obvious last time I had this. But still, again, like Sprite. Sprite is the main like forward component. Even like even like sweet, like a little sweet like Sprite. Um, Again, mostly herbal floral components. Nothing like the same kind of baking spice ginger sort of thing we found on the Sipsmith. It's mostly still in the herbal pine kind of realm. There's some floral components. All right, so the Botanist Isla Dry Gin on the palate. Cheers. How are you doing? Are you doing good today? I'm doing all right. So again, the palate is mostly citrus for me. And in the finish, you get more of that juniper. Citrus is there. Some of that bug spray note is in the finish, which is not my favorite. Very low on the pine. Overall, not too bad. The air, I think, is kind of like made this a little bit less harsh for me. I remember when I neck poured this, I felt it was like really kind of aggressive, but this isn't too bad. What are you doing? We are rating this this gin, the Botanist Isla Dry Gin, containing 22 foraged island botanicals. We're gonna do a score. We're scoring it. So the same on the nose. That's the thing about gins. I don't know like how much development you can expect out of gins. I have less experience with gin than I do with like scotch, for example, with like whiskey related beverages. So I don't know if like, hey, if we leave this for a minute, if it's going to have much of a development. It might, but I get the feeling it might be pretty samey. I gotta go. I'll come back later. All right. I would assume that maybe some of the infused elements evaporate faster or slower than others, and you could have some development in that way. Palette is maybe not as expressive as I would like. Um, a pretty reasonable mouthfeel, but the palette is like pretty low in intensity for me. Even at this particular proof, um, you do get some of that little bit of like Sprite, citrus, lemon, lime character, but mostly the flavor spikes going into the finish. You're gonna get a more loud juniper, bug spray, um, um, you call it citrus, a little bit of like slight pininess, maybe some herbal qualities on the finish too. The palate definitely seems low in intensity compared to the finish, so the nose is like pretty reasonable. The palate I would consider, by whiskey standards, we would consider this weak. And the finish is like pretty good. Actually, not a bad length for a gin, which I think often is like pretty clean. So I don't know if like this is like typical of gins where the palate is like maybe not the most expressive. This one is 46% alcohol, so if the flavors and the alcohol kind of go hand in hand like they do with whiskey, you would expect a little bit more flavor impact from this. It's kind of like a little tame for me. That being said, sometimes you still get whiskeys that are even 100 proof that don't have the best palate. Of course, the distillate and the age have something to do with that. So maybe in this case, the strength of those infused elements on the palate is going to depend on which ones you use or what process you use to infuse them. Again, I'm not a gin expert, but I do know that this palate is drinking a little weak for my taste. And again, maybe that's normal for gins to drink a little light on the palate, but we're still giving it my personal subjective opinion. And for me to have a really banger gin, I think I'd want that palate to really sing, you know. We're gonna do one more sip, and then we'll start writing some numbers. "10:30 a.m., not where I am, brother. Not where I am. Even if it was 10:30 a.m. though, I tend to go to bed at like 2 p.m. because I work overnight. So it's potatoes. It's gotta be noon somewhere, yeah. Yeah, again, the palate's a little light. Actually, a little bit of sweetness with that lemon lime citrus characteristic on the finish. Again, I don't want to call this bug spray kind of note like an off note because it's probably related to the botanicals that are infused here, but it's not my favorite note. Drinking Deepwoods off is not my favorite taste. But It's not bad with those other elements. So out of 25, let's talk about the aroma. And again, if you were a gin lover, a gin enjoyer, I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to gin. We're just treating this like it's any other spirit. So if I'm doing this all wrong, sorry. But I'm just treating this like it's a rum or a cognac or a whiskey, bourbon scotch, whatever you want to call it. We're just giving it the same criteria as to try to excel. So there's like several kind of reasonable notes on the nose. But none of them are the strongest, and they're a little bit fleeting too. We kind of got a good bouquet, different aromas at first, but it's kind of like devolving into just some like lime herbalness, like an herbal character, like a lime character. And maybe a slight woodiness. That's kind of like where we're at now. But we had some interesting development since it's been poured. That being said, the intensities are kind of all over the place. I'm going to give the aroma a 14 out of 25. 14 is good. Alright. So we're going to assess the palate, which to me is a little bit on the weak side. There's kind of only a little bit of flavor in the middle of it. Probably in the 9 to 12 range. Yeah, it's kind of just like a soft, little bit of like juniper, a little bit of like citrus notes. Not great for me. Doesn't really spike till you swallow. And then you get a good explosion of intensity of flavors right at the start of the finish. Still call the palate like, I don't know, man. It's like pretty bad. We're gonna call it 8. Alright, so now we'll talk about the finish. Again, the length is like not too bad. It's like maybe, I don't know. I think short plus is reasonable. And again, these gins I think tend to be pretty clean. So we're probably not expecting a long, lingering kind of finish off of it. And again, my understanding of like whiskeys is that the finish and the age is roughly related. So if you have a very old whiskey, they tend to have a longer, more pronounced, robust finish. And obviously this is not aged. So that might account for it maybe coming off a bit clean. But it still affects our enjoyment of this particular spirit neat. And you get a spike of those citrus notes, some juniper in there. You get some of that little bit of like deep woods off bug spray is not my favorite. Herbal qualities in there. Not the worst finish. Actually, we'll call it medium minus. That's maybe a little bit more fair. It's got some legs. Um, I'll call the finish like it's got a good set of notes, but it's just not my favorite kinds of notes. But we won't kind of mark it for that. Again, we'll call it 14 again on the finish, I think. And at 10, we'll talk about the texture, which there's probably nothing really to write home about. Are you coming over here, you? Cat is waiting in the wings. You can see a paw right there, look. There she is. Reasonable. I'll call it 4 to 10 on texture. On a 15, we'll talk about our personal experience with this. Um, so it's not too bad. I haven't had too many gins, so like that, this is not one of my favorite flavor profiles for gin. Definitely comes off like super like herbal, super green. Um, it has some nice lemon lime characteristics, which if you want to like pair this with Sprite, it would definitely harmonize straight with a Sprite or 7 Up, this kind of idea. It's very similar in flavor profile to like one of those lemon lime sodas, but also it has some other notes. You got some herbal qualities to it. My not so favorite part is again, there's still like a Deep Woods Off type bug spray note, which isn't my favorite a note to have. Also, the palate is maybe a little weak. You detect this the most on the finish. So in that way, it kind of has like some room for improvement for my personal taste. Have that palate really kick a little more, give us more flavor on the palate. That being said, there's a good spike of intensity on the finish. It's reasonable. There's a good set of bouquet of aromas initially. Not too bad. That being said, this wouldn't be, because it has a mix of notes that aren't my favorite, and the profiles maybe like not super like my favorite profile to drink neat. I wouldn't reach for this very often, I don't think, even if I was in the mood for gin. Um, just the Sipsmith, for example, that we picked up the other day has a better flavor profile for me, and it's like miles different than the flavor profile available on this one. So for me, this is like maybe a distinct gin. It's interesting. It's probably the only gin that's going to have this flavor because it again is made from Isla Botanicals. That being said, just because it's a unique product doesn't necessarily mean it tastes the best, in my personal opinion. So for me, this is maybe like, I'll give it a 6 out of 15. It's got some distinct qualities, but maybe not the best flavor profile overall. So if we put these together, it's 10, 28, 38, 46. 46 out of 100. It's okay. It's an okay gin. It's on the upper end of okay. Not too bad. That being said, I vastly prefer if it had like a different flavor profile. I think that's like the biggest struggle for me with this one.